And in every country,
Yeah.
not even the one that you are in now, there is a work of talk, of language, of behavior, of networking. And I suppose if you want to put a handle to it, you would say, really, cues is really about networking, isn't it? And so when I started to
Mm.
realize that although I had gained some of the highest qualifications in Canada, which is what I came for, when I look back, I realized that there were social cues, political cues, and so on that I really missed that may have allowed me to have even a better experience in Canada.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Envisionaire podcast with Nicole Nguyen. This is a podcast where we explore everyday topics, share our experiences, and help turn life's challenges into life's opportunities. Let's get ready to envision living our best lives. On today's podcast, we have my dear friend and former mentor, Dr. Annette Isaac, who wrote the book, Missing the Cues, Tales of a Newcomer's Life in Canada, a wonderful memoir about Dr. Isaac's experiences as a newcomer in Canada from the perspective of a woman of color born in Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Isaac is an author and scholar well-versed in gender and race and politics, political science, international development, and globalization, as well as a former adjunct research professor and lecturer at Carleton University. I have known Annette for nearly 20 years in a capacity of professor, mentor, and now close friend. So I'm very happy that she has agreed to come on the Envisionaire podcast to share her experiences as a newcomer to Canada 50 years on, so she can offer us practical advice as to ensure that we are not missing any of the unspoken cues to enjoy a rich social, political, and economic life. So welcome, Annette Isaac. So pleased to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. We have so many chats. And so today is a little different one. So I'm just delighted to keep chatting with you and sharing some of the experiences over the years.
Well, I obviously, again, because of our background, we know each other so well, but I always love to start the podcast with each guest's origin story because I think it can be helpful for guests to know who you are, and it also gives greater context to our conversation. So, if I can ask you to share a bit about yourself, your childhood, your journey from Trinidad and Tobago to Canada, and why you ended up staying in Canada.
Well, I've thought about this so much, and over 50 years, as you've, you've indicated here, certainly places me in terms of time that I've been here. You know, Nicole, I left in Trinidad in 1972 when I was 21 years old. And at that time, I think it was a time of migration to North America. I just wanted to breathe a fresh air. I'd finished high school in Trinidad, and I was a bookie. I was a study nut. I loved studying and so on. And I knew I wanted to do especially languages. I excelled in languages, French, Spanish, and literature. And so I headed north. And the reason why I
Mm-hmm.
was Canada at the age of 21 was that I had uncles in Edmonton, and one of them in
Mm-hmm.
particular had gone to the University of Alberta. And we had kept in
Okay.
touch in my younger years. And he encouraged me to come to Edmonton. He says, I'm already here. I can help you get established and so on. So that, and
Mm.
so I did 1972, boarded an Air Canada plane, headed out to Edmonton, all quite naive and innocent and all that. However, I did finish the degree in languages, French and Spanish, at the University of Alberta. And
Yeah.
the question at the time was, well, why did you choose Edmonton, not Quebec, let's say, where there was French? And as I said again, it is because simply I had family there. So that was the
Mm-hmm.
first entry into Canada, why I left. However, I want to tell
Mm-hmm.
you that all of us from the Caribbean at the time, we had this vision, this dream that we will always go back. So we'd come, we'd do our thing, and we would go back. That's where I entered Canada.
Okay, so you were drawn, you had family here, so that really helped. That was a draw, and you had that connection with your uncle. And why did you end up staying?
Again, that's a life story. I think it's a destiny story.
Yeah.
After I finished my first degree, I went back to Trinidad just to unwind and de-stress. But after six
Mm-hmm.
months at home, my my mother encouraged me to come back. And by the way, as we unfold the story, I'll go backward and forward in terms of my origin story and where I am now. But part of my leaving, though, Nicole, was really, I just wanted to get away from mommy. I was the
Okay.
first girl, first of 5 girls, 6 children. Let
Yeah.
me get the math clear.
Yeah.
6 children. I'm the first of 5 girls. And by the time I
Okay.
was about 14, I figured, you know what? I just want to be out of here. So that was part of my reason for leaving. However, she was very,
Yeah.
very supportive. And so when after that hiatus in Trinidad, after the first degree, I knew I wanted to do some more work. So I came back to Canada, left Edmonton, and then I settled in Ottawa. And I applied to the
Mm-hmm.
Carleton University that had a program in international affairs. Because you see,
Yeah.
Nicole, while I was doing the first degree in languages, I also started to look at the international aspect of it. And in fact, when I was in Trinidad and people knew that I was a bright person and that in languages I would be a diplomat, everybody saw me as a diplomat. I didn't see myself as that. However, that idea and that draw to the international arena via the language was strong. And that pulled me to Ottawa. And at the time, Carleton's International School of International Affairs was just getting off the ground. And so myself and many other students from all over the world came to Carleton between 1978 and 1980. The program started a few years before, but that's where I started at Carleton. So I did a master's there at Carleton. And when I did that master's, though, by then you ask why I stayed. Because you see the trajectory that had taken me to Edmonton, which is family bringing family and providing opportunities in a new country. That was the theme, the dynamic at the time. So when I came after I finished that first degree and the second one and settled in Edmonton, my sisters in Trinidad who were 16, 17, 18, they too wanted to follow in my footsteps and they wanted to study.
Okay.
And the immigration environment at the time allowed parents to bring children who were under 21 and who weren't married. So my parents came. I had a really helpful immigration officer at the time. So within months, my parents and my 2 sisters joined me in Ottawa. So you see, my life is starting to change. So this dream of going back to Trinidad, my Trinidad life, that was starting to be on the sidelines. On top of that, destiny had another place for me because I met my husband, a Canadian man, and I currently got married after I had the master's. And so you could see the life pattern started to take hold in Canada. So we're talking about 72, 82, 85, and so on. And then the third part, which would really bring me to our story, yours and mine, Nicole, was that at some point, doing all of these things, personal life and so on, I realized I still wanted some more study. I wanted to explore some of the issues that came out of my research at Carleton, and I had also started to work in international development community in Ottawa. So I brought all of that dynamic and those issues and excitement into a PhD at McGill. By the time I did that, I was in my late 40s now, if fast forwarding. And then I thought, well, I did my career at the university. And that is the whole notion of cues came about. The whole notion of what I'd missed, because you don't start to look for a job in university at 49 or 50, which is what I was doing. And my first year of teaching at Carleton, along with my friend, Dr. Jill Fickers, she really started to help me understand this notion of mentoring. And she shared a course with me. We're teaching gender and politics. And she did one part of it as an introduction to teaching at Carleton. And the second half of that course was on gender and politics, if I remember clearly, back in 2007. You were in that class. And so that is where our connection was formed. I think you're a little bit leery of me. Who is this person taking over from my dear Dr. Jill? And,
No.
We finished the class. And as I said, as we discussed during the podcast, the rest is history still in the making. It's not a finished history in the making. So that's a snapshot of where I am today and also the foundation for the book that you mentioned.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you. That was really helpful to have all that background. And I'm sure the listeners appreciate just hearing everything, what a journey it was. And so it's really fascinating. Lots to talk about at different points. I was definitely not weary in any way. I was actually really excited to see you, this vibrant female professor, coming in and talking about gender and politics, and from your vantage point as well, and bringing in your stories. So I really loved it. And then I do remember, I'm sure I actually have a visual going up to you after that first class and actually saying, I remember saying, like, are you from, I don't know if you mentioned you were from Trinidad. I was like, oh, my parents are from Trinidad, and we had that instant sort of connection, just having that sort of Trinidadian connection. So that was a very good memory that I have of that, and the start of a long friendship. But I wanted to know, let's kind of, if we can rewind a little bit back to when you first arrived into Canada.
Sure.
I'm curious. Obviously, you came at a time, it was the 1970s, but I know that in the 1960s, late 1960s, reading actually in your book, there were a lot of racial tensions between Caribbean students claiming, to have experienced racism from professors at a Quebec university.
Yes.
And obviously, I know you went to University of Alberta, so on the other side of Canada, for those who aren't familiar with Canada. And I just wanted to know how that affected your arrival into Canada, and did it impact, how was the student life at the University of Alberta? Were there tensions? Were there similar tensions? What was your experience like when you arrived?
It didn't really. Well, first of all, again, and here is where I think when we're talking about the short memoir that I did and getting ready for Canada, to come to Canada, what was happening at the then called Sir George Williams University, now Concordia. And if people are interested, they can just Google research and you will see there's a whole background and history about it. And there's been some recent discussion in the press, I think, about apology. But where I was in Trinidad at the time, this was going on between the 1970s and 1972. It didn't affect me personally. But I think at the time, though, the whole notion of wearing an afro was big. And there was so much tension in the air around what was happening in Canada and the Caribbean students and all the difficulties between the two people living in the region and those studying abroad, that it impacted me when I was going to the embassy, the High Commission embassy, to Spain. Because people said to me, with all this Afro business and Black power and so on, you better not have an Afro hairstyle. So I think I wore a wig. It's either that or I straightened my hair, because I was so darn bent on getting to Canada, and I didn't want anything to stop me. Of course, as I write in the memoir, I was politically naive at the time. But anyway, and I think my credentials spoke for me. Going to the University of Alberta, now you see, for those of you who are listening who are probably not from Canada, from the University of Alberta, which is where I went and did languages, is in the west of Canada. And this was happening in the east. And so if you guys do anything, it's about nobody in the west really paid too much attention to what was happening at Sir George Williams at the time. There might have been talk, but it did not really impact me then. I think in looking back that I started to realize that this was a time of upheaval and so on. But I will tell you that at campus, though, people were starting to wear the afro, and I subsequently took it on. And I've since, as you can see, I've never stopped wearing my hair like that.
It looks great. And that's really fascinating. It's good that I'm glad to hear that you obviously did not experience those sorts of tensions, because I'm sure that would have been even harder as a newcomer to have that additional stress and worry. Yeah, no, I think that's really fascinating. I think what it would be helpful now is to actually move into the crux of the book, because now we know who you are and have a bit of background. And I think Missing the Cues is honestly such a great book. It's readable. It's relevant, I think, at any stage of anyone's life. And I don't actually think you need to be a newcomer. I think it will help a lot of newcomers, but I actually don't think you even have to be a newcomer, because I think you picked up on so many cues that people miss, even if they're not newcomers. And so I really, I'd love to delve into some of the cues of the book if we can.
Sure.
So what was the motivation for writing Missing the Cues? And what was the intention? And did it change over time with the actual writing of it?
Well, the thing is, Nicole, I think for many of us who come into the country, you're focused on your study, getting a job, home, this sort of thing. I think that's a story of all immigrants. However, in
Mm.
my case, this book was in my mind for many years, even when I was doing my master's and later my doctorate. But it was when I was teaching in the classroom, and I credit Dr. Jill Vickers with telling me, she says, if you want to write, when you start to teach, the ideas will come to you. And she was right because by then, interesting question you're asking me about the politics. That was when I first came to Canada in 1972. But by 2005, 6, 7, after I finished at McGill, I had a much more sensitized political awareness. And
Mm.
I realized the whole issue of multiculturalism in Canada, which is a big thing in our country here, that we are all one people,
Yeah.
regardless of color and background. But that too has come under a lot of scrutiny, as you know.
Mm.
Issues of racism started to emerge. And I started to look at myself as a newcomer to this country because even after 50 years, as you point out, there are things that I'm still learning. And that was
Mm-hmm.
where that idea that I could produce something that could be helpful to newcomers who are coming in, and I think especially students of color. And so I started to say, well, look, I'm comfortable now in my life, but I knew there were many things that I missed. And the whole idea of cues, CUES, and here I put on my teaching hat, as opposed to cue for lining up. It's a cue. It's something that you miss. That cue is, what did I miss? And in every country,
Yeah.
even the one that you are in now, there is a network of talk, of language, of behavior, of networking. And I suppose if you want to put a handle to it, you would say, really, cues is really about networking, isn't it? And so when I started to
Mm.
realize that although I had gained some of the highest qualifications in Canada, which is what I came for, when I look back, I realized that there were social cues, political cues, and so on that I really missed that may have allowed me to have even a better experience in Canada and perhaps
Mm-hmm.
stand on all the learnings that I had. Let's say, to take a very, very simple and basic example, because in the book I talk about social cues, economic cues, political cues, and education cues. But just in terms of a life
Yeah.
moment, I remember as a good Catholic girl, I came to Canada. The nuns and the priest told you when people ask you a question, you answer honestly and authentically. And so when people would ask me how I was, I'd say I'm fine. And but when by fine, I would then begin to tell them what was happening to me and so on and so on. And if I wasn't well, I would say, I wasn't feeling well.
Yeah.
Yes, honestly and truthfully. So when somebody asked me if I was fine, you see, fine wasn't just a stopgap for me. And when I would ask Canadians, well, how are you? They would say, fine, everything's fine, fine, fine. But I would discover after that those people I was be speaking with, that they weren't fine. Actually, there were health issues, other issues that made that word fine not as honest as I thought. And over time, I came to understand by the time when I made deeper connections, and I've said to people, well, why is everybody saying fine when people are not well? And they said, look, that's one
Right.
way of stopping a conversation. We don't want to talk always about ourselves. So we always say we are fine, we are fine, we're fine, you know. And the reason that stuck with me, Nicole, is because growing up, and we lived in a village environment where
Mm.
got up in the morning and you walk through the neighborhood, people ask you, well, how are you? And you say, I'm not feeling well today. And by the next day, you would see them, how are you? Well, I'm much better today. So there was a conversation. And if you said, and
Right.
you hardly use the word fine, you would say, well, or I'm really good. And so that is one of the things that I found that after a while, so when somebody told me they were fine, I realized, maybe they're fine, but there are other things besides. And in fact, I would often
Right.
find out later on that it wasn't the case. But that's an example
Yeah.
of missing the cues. One of the other
Yeah.
one of the other cues I think again that relates to our connections has to do. Let me fast forward to the book where I write about my time as an academic. And one of
Mm-hmm.
the things that I really shared with my students was the notion of understanding how to network from the very early years that you're in the university. Whether you want to go on to higher education, more university study, or even if you're just looking for work. And I realized at my later years, as I said earlier, I was at the end of my 40s when I started to try to find a job in the university. And little did I know, I did not understand at the time that I should have started that networking much earlier in my career. I should have really kept in touch with my professor, with whom I had good relationships with, but working with them, understanding the notion of publications, going to conferences, and so on. And I really missed that cue big time. So that by the time, once I got into the university and I started to talk and I said, gee, how does one become a faculty professor? They pretty well were quietly laughing me out of the room because you could not start to look for an academic life, an academic profile that late. And those are two examples. As I said, one very funny, but the other one that was more on the serious side. And as you know from our relationship over the years, that's one thing we're able to work with, to understand that you and a few of the other students who have stayed in touch in many ways, and some of them I've lost touch with, but either through their profiles, I would see that they had moved on to quite interesting careers. But I do remember that is one cue that I missed along the way.
Well, that was going to be my next question for you, which missed cue out of the employment, education, political, and social cues do you think is the most important cue, and why?
You see, because I got work fairly easily because in the 80s and especially when I finished my master's at Carleton, the working environment was a lot more accessible. There were many more jobs available. The competition was as serious as now. So at Carleton, in fact, when I worked as a library assistant, the jobs were advertised and I applied and I got one of the jobs in the NGO, non-governmental area. And so that really wasn't a problem. But again, looking back, Nicole, people would tell me, I remember one incident when I was working at CEDA on a temporary contract. And I remember some of the fellas especially saying, where you're a Black woman, you have an education, you're a visible minority. And this was a key term at the time. You were a visible minority, or you must get work. And I always remember that notion of visible minority. I don't know if you have a similar expression in Britain, but the notion of visible minority is that somebody of color. That time was multiculturalism was at its peak. And so people like myself who were now entering the workforce in more numbers were encouraged to apply. At the time, too, I didn't really understand the notion of visible minority. I thought, well, I had enough qualifications. I wasn't going to be taken simply on how I looked. I realized later on that that's a cue that I missed. Cue in the sense that thinking that somehow that was understood, that it was understood that as a Black woman, I had all doors open to me. And that was not the case, of course.
Right.
The subtle nuances of that. And I think maybe looking back now, I could actually say it was a very racist type of comment because I did not, people saw me as one, simply as one identity without really considering me as what I know to myself as somebody who is equal in every respect. The point that I raised just with you about the education side, because you see, I loved study. And as I started to live in Canada and I gained more academic qualifications, I realized that I wanted to really get into the university. And here is something that I raised in the memoir, where I was also looking for collegiality. I thought, finally, I love a campus. It still turns me on, and I'll find people who have the same ilk and who want to talk. But the reality is quite different. Once you get into the university environment, and if you're looking to be in a faculty position, collegiality is something aside. You have to have a mentor. You have to have one or two persons who will be leading you through the process, writing with you, publishing with you, doing workshops with you. And I think if it's anything that I can really pinpoint to that I really miss at the end of quite a fulfilling life, it was not understanding the path, which started now to bring us back to the origin story. Had I, the origin
Mm-hmm.
story, left Trinidad in my backpack with the understanding that, Annette, you're going abroad. Here are some of the things that you really need to understand as you work through the society. My dear, not
Mm-hmm.
even my uncles knew that, so they couldn't help me. And my environment, me
Yeah.
being the first one in the family and breaking a lot of ground, friendship ground, which
Yeah.
now is very
Yeah.
well trodden. That kind of understanding, that networking, how to keep one's contacts and to ask the questions. That's what, who, why, where, and when. So much so that my daughter, who was born in Canada, didn't have to go through that. But she heard her mom
Yeah.
talk a lot about how to network, how to ask questions. Don't forget to check with
Yeah.
your profs, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is one of the cues that I think. And I've talked to quite a few people over the years and who are
Mm.
comes to Canada, and we've shared similar stories.
This idea of a mentor, I know that in the UK, well, particularly in law firms, mentors are good, are great to have. They tend to kind of be there to guide you along your path. But in fact, what's really important are sponsors. And the sponsors are the ones who they'll do the things with you, like, publish articles and so on. But at the end of the day, they're the ones who in the back rooms are advocating for you on your behalf, and they're sticking their neck
Yes,
out for you.
yes.
And that is I've learned that's one of the most important things to success, especially in let's say a law firm or private sector. It's really, really important to have a sponsor. And actually they've started distinguishing like mentor versus sponsor, which is very interesting. Yeah, but no, it's fascinating. I mean, and you picked up on that. And so I think that's one of the cues that you're also stressing was quite important, especially in the academic world.
I mean, it's part of how people do business around the world. However, if
Yeah.
you are in a new country, and this is what I'm stressing, this is the whole
Mm.
comma, not predicament so much challenge. Yes, you can, if
Mm-hmm.
you have the credentials, you will get the opportunities. But what about more opportunities or
Mm-hmm.
exploring one potential to the fullest? And how does that
Yeah.
happen? It
Fascinating.
is,
I love it.
it is,
I love
yeah,
it.
it is quite something.
Yeah. So I'd like to delve a bit more into each of the different cues, specifically political cues. I know you described
Yeah.
the layers of inner circles you discovered when you tried to get involved in federal politics in Ottawa in 2007. And you said that you came to the realization that you, quote, did not have the time or the stamina to develop the contacts, nor honestly the appetite for the political game,
Yeah.
end quote. So, what sort of stamina do you think one needs to succeed in politics, especially given your experience and, in hindsight, what sort of stamina do you think one needs to
Well,
succeed?
again, this is it. I go back to even before the origin and the background of my childhood. I guess we were all political animals because at supper time when I was growing up, we didn't have TV or it was only radio like this, and we would talk around the table. So I really understood. My dad especially would bring in all the chat from outside. So we had a lot of political discussions. I look back now at the table. We knew what was happening, where it was happening, and we had an opinion and everything. But again, Nicole, as I said, as a newcomer, those of us who came, my real journey, once it looked as if Canada was where I was going to be, was really to settle the family, my sisters, my
Mm-hmm.
mom, and my dad. And so
Mm-hmm.
that notion of really finding the time to go to talks, to go to political meetings, that was really in the background. And again, once I finished the master's and even the doctorate, and I started to say, gee, maybe I could, because I was working living in Ottawa and had worked with the federal government, I was really fascinated by
Mm-hmm.
the federal interplay and of politics and people like Jean Augustine, Rosemary Brown. They were some of the
Yes.
early trailblazers in politics. And I read
Yeah.
their stories and so on. And I realized that they put in a lot of hard work. They were in different communities too. The women I talk about did not come really out of the Ottawa community. Jean Augustine is in Toronto, and Rosemary Brown was in Vancouver. And I think those were
Mm.
bed of politics. And I didn't really have the time, Nicole, And I did go to one or two meetings. I think I joined the Liberal Party at the time, and I went to a woman's meeting. And at that meeting, really, my eyes opened, and I realized
Mm.
that people around here have been in the trenches for a very long time. So
Mm.
the president of the organization was already identified. The assistants were already identified. And in my 40s, if I really wanted to get into that arena, Nicole, I would have had to start to work, just start with the grunge work. Although so many
Yeah.
women have told us, stop cutting on, opening envelopes and stuffing envelopes. But quite frankly, that's what a
Mm.
lot of them did. They went to the meetings, they went,
Mm-hmm.
they opened the envelopes, they would find maybe a kindred voice or a face. And at the time, they were looking for visuals. All the politicians were looking for visuals to enhance their profile. And by the time I started, I very quickly, because I can assess situations fairly well, I said, Annette, you don't have the time. And then my daughter was
Yeah.
growing up at the time, and I invested a lot of as a mommy, I did what
Yeah, of
mommy did for
course.
us. So it's a
Yeah.
stamina that you need. You've got to walk the talk. You've got to show
Yeah.
up. You have to write to people, call people,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so, if you're not prepared to do that, unless you have the sponsors in the background, or by birth,
Yeah.
and we all know how that works, or wealth, so that I had neither the
Yeah.
birth, neither the wealth, and I was lacking some of the stamina.
I feel like we could talk more about that, but it might have to be another conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to be continued, exactly. Okay, so exploring employment cues.
Yeah.
And today in our conversation, you stress the importance of a strong network
Mhm.
and contacts. In the book, you said that this often led you to tips revealing good job opportunities that had not been advertised, or referrals for later opportunities.
Yeah.
So if someone feels like either they're a newcomer or they have been settled for a while, but they still don't have a very strong network, or they haven't met the right people willing to share their own network, what would you advise them to
Well,
do?
Nicole, that question too has evolved.
Hmm.
What I found now is that for newcomers, this notion of how to settle and how to get the best of it, because Canada now, like again, many of the G7 and the Western countries that are
Mm-hmm.
endowed in terms of wealth, are really looking to recruit people on almost every sector. So there's a kind of
Mm-hmm.
tracking now, and so if you
Okay.
went to, I did some looking up on this, I did some research on this, and I went to some of the government websites, and
Yeah.
now portals for newcomers. And under those
Oh.
portals for newcomers, you would find how to network, who to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
There's a list of organizations that I didn't know
Right.
then. So you find a list of government organizations, a list of non-government organizations, a list of community, even cultural associations. So my thing would be to look, first of all, even before you leave the country, and I didn't have, in an ideal world, I would have marketed this book really more globally, because this is
Mm-hmm.
even before you come to the country. I think
Yeah.
that's something that's missing, quite frankly. But that kind of information is now well established. In fact, just yesterday, interestingly, I was looking at the news in Toronto, and it's talking about how to newcomers, what to look for. There was talks about it, places to go. I didn't see that when I came. When I first arrived in
Right.
Ottawa, in Edmonton, there
Yeah.
wasn't a Caribbean community except my uncles and so on that I could have tapped
Right.
into. Certainly, when I came to
Right.
Ottawa, there were Trinidad and Tobago Guyanese organizations. Those things
Yeah.
have ebbed and flowed as people have come and gone. And so
Right.
that now that is simply one entry point. But you
Yeah.
get that information even before you come Canada. So that's what I would say,
Okay.
because that's where I really found a lot of the working contacts.
Interesting. So like social networks
Yes, yeah,
that are geared more towards newcomers,
yeah.
essentially.
Yes,
Yeah.
that the governments have realized that because of the urgency with which to settle new people for industry and all the other jobs where there are thousands of applications, There is an urgency
Mm-hmm.
to really have available publicly information at the click of a mouse. The other thing to Nicole,
Mm.
when I came in the 70s and the 80s, the social media network was not as vast as it is now. I mean, you go to any of
Yes.
the government departments and they say, like us on Facebook, see us on Twitter, TikTok is the
Yeah.
new
Yeah.
one. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, like a dinosaur talking about these things. But I didn't have these kinds of media helps and resources. And to
Yeah.
tell you that now, usually, if I want any information, I do go to the internet and I look up the organizations and I get it is quite helpful in terms of that initial
Absolutely.
stage of finding information.
I agree. We're in a different, it's a digital media world. It's a different sort of world in the sense you just have you have information, just infinite amounts of information accessible, and so many opportunities. So, and I also think that, like, if let's say a social network or something isn't even available for you, if you're a newcomer to a country, you can start it.
Yes,
You can
yes,
start your own. And that is the joy of, information age and digital media, social media now. And you can just start groups and people will come. So it's really, it's incredible.
yes,
But yeah.
yes.
Okay. Now on to education cues. I know you mentioned your parents, in particular your mom, was super supportive of you pursuing your education. And in the book, you said so beautifully, quote, "She was the wind beneath my study and encouraged me every step through the higher levels of secondary school."
Mhm.
That's end quote. That's really beautiful. I wanted to know what advice you would offer those who want to pursue education, or they're, starting a new career and they want to create new opportunities in that way, but maybe they don't have the support or they have limited access to resources.
Mm. Again, I think that's a difficult one, Nicole, because you're really describing the the lack of opportunities for some of us as newcomers as we come to the country. And I'd be
Mm-hmm.
relieved to leave this discussion without recognizing that it's not an easy entry into here. And I think, interestingly enough, for newcomers, starting with a health network, I think,
Mm.
is one area where if you have a family doctor, or even if you found a supportive air at the local community organizations, I think that is where I would tell people who have arrived here to really tap into
Yeah.
that. If, let's say, you're here
Okay.
when you just came off the plane, I would say
Yeah.
are in Ottawa and every place there are community organizations that have a door that says newcomer. That's the
Mm-hmm.
so you don't have to be that alone. How, as
Right.
again, for me, talking to you today and thinking about this, the journey to a new country it really starts before you come. The door that I came through, by the way, was a door of study. I came for a particular purpose. I had resources, I saved my money, and I
Mm-hmm.
with my uncles. A lot of people sometimes are fleeing instability. Some come as
Yeah.
refugees. So you simply come, for those people who come just with, my God, to escape a situation, their entry point is going to really be, how do I get a hot meal, get warm clothes, and so on.
Yeah.
So I think that,
Yeah.
so we're talking here about the entry points that you come into in Canada. I didn't have to worry
Yeah.
about clothing and so on. My uncle, even, who was very supportive in helping me get into the U of A, because he knew how to help me fill out an application. You see,
Mm-hmm.
mommy, and my sisters were always very supportive. And of course, my mother, and you will relate to this, Nicole, from the Trinidad and Tobago, which I hope I said at the beginning. Yes, you might have introduced me as that. Pray. Oh, they were praying for me and
Aw,
for you. Every exam,
that's
I turned to prayer, and as a good
yes.
Catholic, I'm quite relaxed now, but everything was prayer. And so there's
Yeah.
no easy answer. It depends on the portal that you come into. In fact, refugees who
Yes.
are coming into the country now have quite a lot of welcoming mats for them. The health facilities have been identified. The school
Yeah.
facilities, by the way. So if you come as a family, there are resources for you. If you come as
Right.
an individual, however, and I think perhaps that might be more relating to what I'm talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
You use the word there, use a digital environment. Use everything at
Mm-hmm.
your fingertips,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you'll get it. And that is what I would say to people coming in here.
Exactly. And also, what I have learned is that there are a lot of funds through the government or through private entities that you don't really know about until you network or your network tells you or you hear from someone who's in that field. Oh, you should apply for this scholarship or this bursary, this grant. And you just sometimes you don't know that these resources are even available. So I completely agree with you on
I
that.
think I also just add, though, Nicole, with all that I told you, there are hidden cues in all of this. I remember as one example, even when I was doing my master's, and people were saying, well, look, here are all these grants and so on that are available. Why don't you guys apply? There's a, when I applied, what I
Yeah.
realized was that, hey, and I went to about 4 or 5 of them that seemed to
Yeah.
offer an opportunity to get funding so that I could either go to a workshop or just even buy the
Mm.
textbooks over and beyond my own domestic budgets. And
Yeah.
so it meant that here is where the sponsor and the mentor would come in. I realized afterwards when I looked at who won the scholarships and so on, that was said to be giving away, your grades were important. I
Mm.
was told, oh, a lot of the people who applied, they had A's and A minuses and A pluses, especially the social sciences. But those things too, that's where the subtleties come in and knowing who to talk to. Because a number of the
Mm.
students I would see got these scholarships, their professors help them understand the background
Right.
to getting a
Right.
grant. You
Yeah.
see? So
Yeah.
this is what I mean when I'm talking about these things, that it's not just that.
Yeah.
And so after 3 or 4 of these things, and I realize I'm sending out all these applications and everybody's writing tons of references for me, and I have my CV that it's looking cracker sharp. These are the new.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that I want to tell you for the newcomer who might be just landing here, once you tap into the
Mm-hmm.
community organization, and there is always somebody available in those places on the wall, there are
Mm-hmm.
really tons of information. So they might have job
Yeah.
applications, grants, and
Yeah.
so on. And that's one of the things,
Right.
once I got into that, understanding how to access information, that was one of the things that really
Yeah.
helped me.
Excellent. Now, my final question regarding the book, again, was this is slightly self interested because, as obviously myself being a mature student, having studied, changed careers, pivoted into law from politics, and then starting my career as a mature woman, something in your book really resonated with me, and I really want to delve into it. So you described your experiences of pursuing your graduate studies, saying that you did not connect the dots, and that your mentoring / networking strategy was a hit or miss, right? In large part because of you had all these competing demands. You were focusing on completing your degree, finding work, sponsoring your family, and then obviously as a mature student, you had family and life responsibilities. So you said that as a result of these competing demands, you knew that a quote new mentoring strategy would be needed.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really keen to know what you meant by that, because what sort of mentoring strategy could be helpful to a mature student with family responsibilities, or a mature adult, who's starting a new job, who also has family responsibilities?
I looked at that line again, and I realized that in future editions of the book, for which I'm encouraged to do, I'll reflect a little bit more on that. And I think that was actually an acceptance of what I had not done.
Mm-hmm.
It's left there hanging. And I've been thinking
Yeah.
about a new mentoring strategy. And it's multifaceted. It would be multifaceted because The word that comes through, Nicole, will be support. And any mentoring strategy of the kind that we who have come to a new country looking for opportunities, the word support, unconditional and long-term support would be key. So I would think
Yeah.
that number one, of course, the mentoring strategy I would have had to have identified early in my career or in my book life, as I call it, because I love study. I would identify the professors. And the thing is, to be fair to all of them, they did tell me. I remember one professor says, you have to publish. And I didn't
Mm.
know what publish meant. So I would suggest there's a new mentoring strategies for those who are reading, but that the first thing that you want to say is, what do I want to do in terms of my own life? And how do I go about it? And
Right.
you have to really have a plan, and that plan has to really include that aspect of support from
Yeah.
people who have seen your potential, first of all in your university or your high school days. Second,
Mm.
supportive professors, colleagues in the working environment, and I mentioned Ted Jackson before. And
Mm-hmm.
here is something that I thought about: as wives, as women with children. No, there are
Mm-hmm.
a lot of single mothers and fathers, but I'm going to speak from the point of view of a woman who has a husband. And you really
Mm-hmm.
need to have what I've heard some women say, you really have to have a very supportive husband, a very supportive mate. There was one woman I met
Mm-hmm.
in Trinidad who, when we discussed these things, and she was dean in one of the faculties, and she really talked, she says, my husband was there for me all the time. He
Mm-hmm.
allowed me to travel. He helped me with the children. And I use this now. Here's where, again, the funny part. Another colleague of mine who I've been friends with all his my life, and he went on. We were both at Carleton together, and he went on to have marriage and do very well in the U.S. And he would be saying, Annette, you should do so and so. And I used to tell him, I won't call his name, not to embarrass him, and I would tell him, you know what? You have a wife. I don't have a wife. You have a wife.
Right.
I don't have a wife. You have to have this notion of somebody who is going to be there for you all the time. And that is one of the things that I would say. So brains you
Mm.
have, health you have, you've
Mm-hmm.
identified your mentors. But that is what I would say that was missing in my mentoring
Interesting.
strategy, not understanding that I would do it all over again with the choice I made of my mates or the child I have. However, I do
Right.
realize that on the gender side,
Yeah.
that we do share, there is a lot, it's disproportionate, the support.
Mm-hmm. It feels like when I heard about the networking strategy you're proposing, it's almost I heard unconditional support,
Mhm.
right? Long-term support, but not only from external sources, but also internally from
Oh,
yourself, but also from your immediate inner circle, partner, children, so on. And with that comes a level of self-awareness to understand, to distinguish between students or colleagues who maybe don't have those family responsibilities or demands, who don't have to worry about all these other facets. I guess they can really just be more carefree, whereas the strategy that you're talking about for, let's say, more mature students or people who have more family responsibilities, it tends to be including being more self-aware
yes.
of other resources that are available.
And again, we're talking about the newcomer, although I would imagine this might apply to people of all backgrounds. But I think, again,
Yeah.
it's a newcomer experience, not those who are born
Yeah.
of newcomers, not those who are born of newcomers, because they're hearing this all the time. The children of
Mm.
newcomers are hehearing this all the time. So almost by default,
Mm-hmm.
they know mom and dad are going to help
Yeah.
them, assuming, of course, and I don't want to trivialize the disparity in our countries. There's a lot
Yeah.
of disparity in our countries, and that has to be
Yeah.
recognized, I think, within the educational system, especially.
Yeah.
However,
Absolutely.
so I'm talking about the newcomer, and I came at the age of 21 as a newcomer
Mm-hmm.
into a country. And you might, if you want to reflect on your own experience, moving into the
Yeah.
UK, so much more
Yeah.
awareness of what was possible than perhaps people, my uncles, for example, because what I'm talking about here simply was not available to them. Survival was the name of the game. So
Yeah.
so that's the distinction that I want to make. I'm talking here about newcomers. So children of newcomers, if children and the children of newcomers who come in now, from what I'm anecdotally hearing, are actually already being exposed to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thank you for dived through the book and then also getting your insights. I think it was great. We're reaching the final segment of the show, and this is the Envisionaire questionnaire, which is the feature of the Envisionaire podcast, and it's where we ask guests 3 questions reflecting on their past, present, and future. And so I wanted to ask you, looking towards your past, if you could give any advice to your 15-year-old self, what would it be?
I want to just tweak that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I want to thank my 15-year-old self. That girl was a dreamer. That girl dreamed faraway places. Of course, breaking free from being big sister and the responsibilities. But that girl dreamed. There were no boundaries in her life. She was a reader of literature, and she liked romance literature. So maybe I could live in a dream of that type of romance. Free Nicole. I thank you for being the dream under my wings.
Beautiful.
And because once I got to Canada, that dreaming kind of stopped because I had to, I had to do that degree, finish it, just to, help the family, help them settle.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I fell in love. So that was, I hadn't really actualized being with the partner that I currently have, who I should say is white. So that I hadn't quite envisaged that one. That's another fun chat. However, she had it, and I lived her dreams, Nicole. So what I am now. So I thank that. I really thank that 15-year-old who did not see any boundaries or obstacles. And in fact, as you asked me that's helped me leap over these obstacles of missed cues, because I would not see obstacles. One door closed, another one would open. And so she had confidence in her dreams that I would be able to do whatever I want. Of course, I had to fill in the dream. But I really do thank that 15-year-old,
I love that. That's so nice. Okay, reflecting on your present, if you could seek any advice from anyone in the world, who would it be and why?
Here's what I have for you, and this is going to be a surprise. Nicole,
oh my gosh, okay, tell me.
I have taught a few of you who I know have gone on to very good careers, and you're in your 30s, maybe 40s, or earlier stages on your life. I would love to have lunch with a few of you. I would say 7 of you. I'd love to have lunch with 7 of you whom I think I can still identify, who sought my office. We didn't talk about this. When I was part of my work as an instructor was to have office hours, and I would have wonderful conversations. And I think to find 7 of you, have lunch with you, and ask your advice on what we elders can still give to you guys. What can we elders bring the 7 of you together and hear your stories, and to see how the kinds of talks we would have had have led you to where you are and what more you see. But most important, I think, because we need to get that feedback tends to be disrupted and discontinued. Of course, I can't call 1,000 students or 500 or even the 15 who were really good, really brilliant ones. All of them in some way. That is what I was thinking about that. And I think that would help certainly enrich my own growing. I still have room to expand, but also what I can share. You've asked that question a lot in this podcast. What can I share? And I'd love hear
Yeah.
from the others what we also still can put out to help them explore their best selves. Is that's one of the terms,
Yes.
to explore my
I love
best
that.
self,
Exactly. Well, you know what, Annette, this might be the beginning of something that comes to fruition. So,
Yeah,
you just let me know
yeah.
when and where, and if you need me to reach out to people, and I will.
Yeah, let's work on it. We've got a plan.
Yeah. Exactly. Good. I love it. Born on the Envisionaire podcast.
Absolutely.
Okay. And future looking, what is the one goal that you would like to achieve in the next 5 years?
Well, by now I think people may pick up on it, but certainly my mother's story. To say
Mm,
that somebody is the wind beneath your wings, I think really needs a life. As an
yeah.
identity. She's gone now, and don't. Oh, I'm choking up there, Nicole. I didn't expect
Oh,
that.
Annette. Aw.
To have somebody as the wind under your wings. Um,
Oh, yeah.
that is, it's a work that has to be done, and I'm looking forward to working on that. Might even be the title of the book. I haven't decided
You're
yet.
the wind beneath my
Wind
wings.
beneath my wings.
Oh, I love
Once,
that. That's so beautiful.
once I clear out all the legalities of wind beneath my wings, and so I. But uh,
No, but honestly, I
yeah,
think that's beautiful. And I'm sure she's looking down on you and she'd be so
every single day,
honored.
absolutely.
Oh,
Thank you so.
that's so
Yeah,
beautiful.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Yeah,
Annette. Thank you for coming on here and being part of the Envisionaire podcast. You have been one of my supporters for so long, and so I'm so grateful I can have you on, share your story, and I really appreciated all the advice that you gave us on how not to miss the cues in life. And for anyone who's interested in reading Annette's book, you can purchase it by going to her website, which is www.AnnetteIsaac, AnnetteIsaac.ca, or you can contact Annette using the same website, and I'll put all of the information in the show notes. So thank you again, Annette, for being part of this. Lots of love.
it's a privilege, Nicole. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to the Envisionaire podcast. You are now officially an Envisionaire, so welcome to the club. Make sure that you like and subscribe to this podcast so that you stay up to date on all of our new episodes. And remember, every day offers us a new opportunity to start envisioning and living our best lives.